Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to By the Horns. I'm your host, Ricky Allardyce, and with me tonight, as always, my co-host, Brandon van Niekerk. And this evening, we are very lucky to be joined by someone who probably doesn't need too much introduction in the South African alt media landscape, one of the great granddaddies of alternative media in South Africa, been around the block. And welcome to the show, Roman. For those of you who don't know Roman Cabanac, this is Roman.
Hello, everyone. Ricky, Brandon, thanks for the invitation. And yes, I do feel quite old. I mean, for those who don't know me, I had a podcast called Renegade Report. Now I have a YouTube channel called Morning Shot. And it was all based on a single bet made in 2016, early 2016, and 2015. And so far, that bet has played off very well. So thank you for the invitation.
Great. Glad to have you, man. So I was initially listening to a bunch of podcasts in America about like classical liberalism and anarchism, and I was kind of finding my feet coming out of varsity. I was a bit of a lefty, well, not of a lefty, and I found Bitcoin and anarchism.
It does.
It's really fucking cold, man. So I was kind of finding my feet in Bitcoin and in anarchism at the same time, and I was just, there was nothing in South Africa that I could listen to that kind of had like a local spin on classical liberalism or right-wing thought. This was around 2015 when you guys launched the show. So I happened upon your show then quite early on in what you're doing, and I was like, this is fantastic, like world quality content with a South African flavor of what's happening. And I mean, you guys went on to make a great success of the show. It was probably the most downloaded show in South Africa, because very often you were beating all the big names that are being punted by the big media agencies. So it was really great to see, and I think you've paved the way for a large amount of alternative viewpoints in South Africa now. Like, we've got quite a thriving industry of like alt media landscape, which is very cool to see. So I've got a debt of gratitude for you on that regard, because it was great to have South African content like that, man.
Oh, cheers. I mean, I wish there was a plan. I wish I could tell you it was the plot all along, but no, it was just it was something that South Africa needed at the time, and we just happened to be the lucky guys to do it first.
Yeah. Well, the point of getting Roman on the show is, so as most Roman, like, he's the guy normally behind the microphone interviewing people, and he doesn't really get the chance that often to be interviewed himself. Well, I haven't seen too many interviews where people interview you, but you've got a lot of very interesting thoughts that we'd like to dive into, specifically surrounding anarchism and the future of South Africa. So maybe if you broadly want to describe what anarchy is, it's not what people think it is mainly, or what the normies think it is. But yeah, what's your take on what anarchy is?
So, well, firstly, sorry, my dog is walking around and she has to stay with me because issues. But generally speaking, anarchy is not no rules. Anarchy means no rulers, which is a distinct difference. Anarchy is not chaos. It just means a space or a political system where the people on the ground rule themselves, rather than a representative democracy or a monarchy or a dictatorship or any of those things. So at the essential element of it, it is non-ideological. It just means no rulers.
So you're telling me anarchy is not people running around in the streets killing each other like the Purge?
No, that's people running around killing each other. That's called murder or mob violence or whatever the case might be. It's not anarchy is just a state of being. It's not. There's no moral. There's no moral status within it. It's just a case of, it's a literal term. No rulers.
So this is kind of the fake news about anarchy gets thrown around all the time. Like, people misuse the term and they refer to anarchy as chaos or a state of general lawlessness, but that's not the case at all. Like, it's kind of the default position for most of human history, right?
Well, yeah, to some degree. I mean, if you can think of tribal cultures as anarchic, if you can think of the Viking era as anarchic, I think that all changed once the Roman Empire established itself, especially in the West. In the East, you had various empires as well. So, I mean, there was no real anarchy as such, but a lot of people, the powers of those empires were quite subdued compared to what we have now. So I would suspect most people lived under an anarchic system, but didn't call it an anarchic system. They were just living, essentially, surviving in whatever way they could.
Yeah, so people were self-organizing without government oversight from on high given to them for how they should live their lives and organize themselves. And that's
Yeah.
really, I mean, we live in a society today where people seem to want to farm out their decision making to other people. You know, and that's why we end up in a position where big government can take advantage of you, because you've just delegated away all of your rights and responsibilities. And anarchy is kind of the opposite of that, right? It's where you take personal responsibility for yourself. You won't be lorded over by anyone. You can subscribe to a set of rules that people in your community agree to follow, but it's not really deterministic in what it needs to be, what it has to be. It's kind of everyone figures out what the rules should be for their own community, and that's how people decide to live. And it's all voluntary based, right?
Yes, ideally that is how it's supposed to be. If you look at the history of anarchy, it's mostly what is termed left-wing these days. It's a reaction against organized hierarchies or political hierarchies or royal hierarchies or empirical hierarchies. So a lot of it was a reaction against that, like the Reformation was that, like a protest against the organized church or established religions or things like that. So there's often this reactive factor with anarchy, but at its core, anarchy is a sense that people can self-determine where they go. Not so much as hyper-individualists. The better option would be to be communities, organizing themselves according to the best of their abilities, developing cultures, developing their own institutions of governance, and hopefully progressing forward with whatever life gives them. So if you look at history, you have like the nomadic tribes, then you got empires, then you got the Enlightenment area, now you got the nation states. So we started off with very little power, and now we've got overwhelming power. So it's probably at the first step of the evolution of political governance.
I mean, it makes sense because it comes from the individual, right? Anarchy, it essentially goes down to the rights of the individual to, you know, make their own decisions that are best for their own lives. And as societies grew in complexity, I suppose that's how we kept farming responsibility further and further out away from ourselves. But let's just dive into the difference between the different types of anarchy, right? Because there's two very well-defined schools of thought in anarchy currently, which is anarcho-communism or syndicalism, which is the lefty anarchy, and then you get anarcho-capitalism, which is kind of a later offshoot of initial anarchic thought. But that's kind of the ideology that I suppose yourself and me subscribe to, which is the capitalist version of anarchy. Do you want to maybe dive into those two a bit more?
So let me just start with the one that I don't necessarily think is correct. Anarcho-syndicalism. It's weird. I've tried to read about it. Noam Chomsky is the most famous anarcho-syndicalist, and it is basically, as far as I understand, workers taking direct action to have more democracy in a society. So it is workers of the world, but it's workers of the community uniting with direct action to have more control over the means of production. That sounds a bit wishy-washy to me. Whereas anarcho-capitalist, it is essentially communism at its core. I'm not against that notion, but this hinging on workers is just dumb. Very few people in the first world are workers. They don't make stuff. Like, we have knowledge workers, right? Like what you do, what I do, we are knowledge workers. Like, our brain determines what we do and how much money we make, but we can't organize around knowledge as such. If you're a routine worker on a factory floor, yes, maybe, but that is dying out, and so will anarcho-syndicalism. I'm more interested in anarcho-capitalism, where you have people who believe in private property first and foremost. And the primary proponents of this would be Murray Rothbard, for example, and what's his name? David Friedman, the other chap's son. He was a famous economist. Milton Friedman, there we go. His son, David Friedman, is a big proponent of anarcho-capitalism. And these days, Malcolm Ellis, I think, is the biggest proponent of anarchism in general, but I think he's more right than left in this regard. So anarcho-capitalists, which is the group I would fall into, believes in private property, the defense thereof, and basically, you know, having high walls to the outside and few walls as possible on the inside. So you have very high walls to counter immigration and invading forces, but inside you have a flourishing, generally free market and cultural expression and all those other things.
So I mean, just on the walls thing, right? This causes a lot of contention within the right-wing community itself, because you've got some type of libertarians and anarchists who believe in open borders, so humans should be able to travel as they wish, wherever they want to go. And then you get the other side of it within that same right wing who are like, no. If we are going to have a society that has, let's say, one of the best examples is like a welfare system. If you're going to have a welfare system, you can't have open immigration, because it's just everyone's going to come to take over your welfare, which is what Europe is experiencing, and America to a lesser degree.
Yeah, but that's only an economic argument, which is to me the poorest argument for open or closed borders. I'm a very closed borders kind of guy, because the essence of a community or a nation or an ethnic group is themselves, right? Yeah. I mean, we all have ways we look at the world. We have different cultures, different histories, and if those different communities can live together peacefully, side by side, trading with each other, fantastic. But the notion that you can preserve who you are and where you come from by inviting everyone in the world to come join you, it leads to a variety of issues. And I don't see this notion. I know the libertarians say open borders because states don't belong to anyone, but not open borders for private property. And that's a Herman Hopper scenario. And I agree with that. But even for nation states, I think it's a bad idea to have open borders completely and utterly. If people want to come through, there's a process, or that state can be as discriminatory as possible, as necessary, as discriminatory as possible, to allow people in, well, mostly in, of course. They can determine it. But without borders, you don't have anything at all. You just have nomads traveling around. How can you build anything if it's not defined by something?
How can you have property rights if you don't have borders? Because where does your property end, right? Like, I own this piece of property, I put a fence around it because I don't want anyone to come in and take what's mine. It's my primary method of defense, is my perimeter that I put around myself. So if you don't allow that at a nation state, or don't allow borders at a nation state level, but you do it at a property level, you just you're pushing that shit downhill. It's going to come and affect those people who are trying to protect their property.
No, absolutely. But you have nothing. But you have nothing without borders, right? Distinct categories are important for everything. This is a pair of headphones. It's not a kettle, because there's a category of something called headphones, right? And those categories exist, and they're meaningful, and they mean things, like they mean certain things to certain people. And we can't start dismissing all categories just because we are touchy-feely about these things. No, categories are very important.
Yeah. So how are you going to keep the postmodernists out if you don't have borders? Because then they're going to come and destroy all your categories if you let the postmodernists in. You can't have that.
Yeah, someone once postmodernism has they have no original claims, but all they claim is, I can't remember. The only original claim is that there is no original claims. Something like that. I think it was very good.
At least they have great art.
No, they don't. What's the difference between postmodern art and vandalism, Brandon?
I don't know. They're all crap.
Yeah, art died long ago, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in this. Modern art is pure shit. I've got no time for it at all.
It's first of all, it's anti-human. And if you look at art, and I put architecture in that category, architecture is inherently anti-human, especially since the 1960s. If you look at the great pieces of architecture that our ancestors built, not our personal ancestors, but people that built around the West, around the East, even locally in South Africa, they still exist 100, 200, 1,000 years later. None of these buildings, skyscrapers in Dubai or Santon, are going to exist for longer than 50 years. They're just anti-human. You need aircon to make it livable. You need a car to get there. It's just anti-human, man. Terrible stuff.
Well, I mean, that the failure of modern architecture is linked directly to the money. If you have money that is based on fiat, where you need to turn over the item you're selling as quickly as possible to sell the next one, that permeates all the way down because you've got this currency that's debasing. So it changes the economic calculation. So if I'm going to build a building on a fiat standard, I'm going to want to rebuild that building as quickly as possible or build it as cheaply as possible to get my money out. Whereas if you do it under a hard money standard, like gold standard, for example, and that's why buildings built during the classical era under a gold standard, under the classical gold standard, are still around, because you had to trade something of significant value that's purchasing power increased over time, your gold, for a building. So in other words, when you buy it, you're going to buy it right the first time and not redo it. And so that's why you can see, if you look at apartheid architecture in South Africa, these brutalist monstrosities we've got in our capital cities, where it kind of looks like the pavement just becomes a wall, and it becomes this horrific building. That was all built under a Fiat standard where inflation rates are through the roof. And they essentially were just trying to build as cheap and as fast as possible, as opposed to Cape Dutch style buildings that were built 200 years ago. They're still around and they still look good. They were built under a sound money standard. Anyway, I digress.
That is rather fascinating. But talking about how the money standard determines the culture, I think that's it's a topic that most people don't see, but one that might be valuable to this discussion if you have the time.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you fix the money, you fix the world, because money is one half of every transaction, right? And if the money is debasing, it basically means if there's inflation happening, it's legalized theft. So the government is stealing from you. They're stealing your time from everyone around the country at a not quite a fixed rate, but close to a fixed rate they target every year. So, and they're telling you that they're stealing from you. And how does that change society? It changes the time preference that people have in society to a high time preference, because you've got to spend your money as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it's going to devalue. Or you've got to invest it in assets that grow at a faster rate than inflation, which also it changes things, because people can't just hold onto their purchasing power as a means of saving. They have to invest, which is by nature speculative and risky endeavor. So it completely, when the Reserve Bank talks about savings rates, that's nonsense. We don't have any savings because everyone's forced into investments where you have to speculate and take on risk. True saving is sitting on your medium of exchange and just waiting for its purchasing power to accumulate slowly over time. So bare minimum, you maintain your purchasing power, but probably you'll increase it if you have a sound money standard. So yeah, we don't have savings in South Africa. We just got into speculative investments, and that changes the fabric of your society. And Brandon, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, no, exactly what you're saying. And if you read Seyfedina Musa's book, Bitcoin Standard, it's one of the best books I've ever read. And I mean, he's a hard bastard. You want to listen to some great podcasts and read some great literature. Yeah, he's an arsehole, but I love him. And he tells things straight. And he explains the high time preference versus low time preference models. And we all live in a high time preference world where credit comes very easily, where we want to consume as quickly as possible, where we go, our indebtedness is way higher than what we're actually what we are capable of producing. And all those things, as Ricky explained earlier, feed down to, the monstrosities that we see and what's happening in economics, but also the quality of products and everything else. But if you have a low time preference and you want to save money for the future, it changes a lot of things around economics, cultures, and all that. And the Fiatists or the Keynesians, they all argue that if we live in a Fiat system, which we do, and they believe we will continue to do so, we have to consume in order to keep the economy running. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest argument, right? And I've listened to some great arguments how that's incorrect. You actually don't. Savings is what takes economies forward. And that's what was happening on the gold standard before 1971. A lot of people were saving and they weren't consuming, and the economies were doing incredibly well.
But I respect. Go ahead, Ricky.
No, just to Brandon's point now about what this fiat living and inflationary currency does. It one of the biggest problems we face in life today is pollution. I don't think it's climate change. I think pollution is the single biggest issue we face, specifically plastic pollution, because every bit of plastic we've ever created is still with us on Earth in some shape or form. It's floating around as a microplastic in the sea, or it's in a landfill. So it's all there still. And everyone complains about, okay, but plastic doesn't get recycled because it costs more to recycle than it does to make new plastic, because it's so cheap to make. We make it from oil-based products. The thing is, we're on an inflationary monetary system, so of course it's going to be cheaper to produce it than it is going to be to recycle it. To make a new plastic bottle is going to be cheaper, because the cost of that capital to buy that bottle is depreciating every single day, right? So the purchasing power of the capital to buy that bottle. So you've got to spend it as quickly as possible. So if everyone was living on a sound money standard, you wouldn't be buying new water bottles every day. You'd have one reusable aluminium water bottle that you would take to a fountain and fill up your water, or to a place in the store and get your water from there, because you wouldn't want to be wasting your hard-won capital that's increasing in value all the time on a plastic bottle you're going to throw away. That makes no sense. It's a bad economic calculation. So all of the environmental destruction we see is driven by a culture that needs to consume, and it needs to consume because, according to the economists, that's how our economies grow, is through consumption. Whereas if you look at it from the Austrian perspective, which is based on sound money, is driven by production and not consumption, which changes everything. So if we want to live in a world that's cleaner, with less pollution, less environmental destruction, we need a sound money standard where we actually really we calculate the economic value of things accurately. Because currently all pricing mechanisms are fucked, because the government just runs the printing presses. And how are you supposed to work out the cost of money if they're controlling the interest rate? There's just no way to do it accurately.
So I agree with both of you, especially in economic terms. But I've been listening a lot to what's called the Dissident Right the past few weeks. And I find them quite interesting. They're not alt-right. They think the alt-right are dumb. But what they do is that they try to fuse different ideologies together, or different principles from different ideologies, and put them into something a bit more succinct, but which is mainly localism with a distinct cultural force within it, surrounded by high walls, so it doesn't get disturbed. And they had a great point about the Austrian economists. They were very good at proving marginal utility and a variety of other things. The biggest downfall, according to the Dissident Right, about Austrian economics is it holds no moral claims, or makes no moral claims about the market whatsoever. Because if we do have sound money, and if we do say the price is determined by the people within the transaction, a lot of stuff that they might find immoral, the Dissident Right might find immoral, would be perfectly acceptable to the Austrian school, like child labor. And this is a thing that is quite a big talking point of, in libertarian circles. Child labor is not the best thing in the world, but it's better earning $2 a day than $0 a day. The Dissident Right would be like no, like you have to have a moral value ethic to the economy. You don't work for the economy. The economy is a tool that we can use for ourselves. But I think you can only do that if you use Austrian economics and then add morals and ethics within it. Like, you can't do it through the labor theory of value or marketism. Like, it can only be done through Austrians. So that is the one divergent view of the Dissident Right, which I'm not a part of by any means. I just find them interesting. And Austrian economics. But as for everything else, money-wise, yeah, I'm fully on board with it.
Yeah, the child labor one is interesting. Like, I encountered this a few years back, and I was like, child labor, of course that's terrible. Why would we ever have child labor? And then I think it was Murray Rothbard who wrote about it. And he was like, child labor is a symptom of society and the productive nature of society. We only have got to a point in humanity now where society is productive enough that children don't have to work, because adults are productive enough to be able to afford to have these kids go to school and be leeches on them for 18 years before they start, being productive themselves. Whereas that was not the case in society. And you go look at the third world countries where kids are working from, I wouldn't say day one, but pretty early on, because they need to produce in order for the family to survive, because there's just not enough productive capital going around in those areas. So it's quite a luxury that we don't have child labor anymore, but it's definitely not been the default position for all of mankind. I mean, put those kids in the salt mines.
Well, at least Elon Musk is giving them jobs, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, and everyone else that says Black Lives Matter. Guys, sorry, 1 second. Can I just take my dog out? That's driving me crazy. My apologies.
Yeah, go for it.
20 seconds.
So, Brandon, you reckon Elon's a proponent of child labor? especially because they got the small hands to put the solar panels and the lithium batteries together.
No, but I mean, on like a realistic note, I mean, there's a lot of lithium mining. I don't know what countries. It's in the West Africa area.
Congo,
But,
Central Africa.
Yeah, Congo, I would think.
yeah, and he
Most
even
of Congo.
said he's all for a coup to control his mines there, and like,
People
think
put
he's
Elon
a
on
great
a
guy.
pedestal. I think he's I think he's a bad actor.
Yeah, I don't care too much about him. I think he's funny. But what do you guys think about this notion of sound money plus morality attached to how those principles of sound money is used? As I'm getting older, I'm not old, I'm 34, but as I'm getting older, I'm finding myself to become much more conservative, not conservative like American conservative Inc., that just work for corporates. I'm talking about culturally conservative. And before I used to say, the market will determine everything. Like, if you don't like what Google's doing, just build your own. And we all know now, like years later, it's all bullshit, right? It's like Google says, Google will suppress everyone. Google will say LGBTQ plus Pride Month is very important. Here's some, content from Black creators, and they'll push it onto you. And no one ever, they can't be punished for it. It's physically impossible to punish them or take away your attention from them in any single way. So the notion that the market will punish companies if you don't like what they're doing, I think it's complete utter nonsense for the most part. I think the libertarians have failed in that regard.
Yeah, it's also, we're not living in a free market at all, and people think we are. But then you see Nancy Pelosi and her husband put in some good positions a night or two ago into FANG stocks, and now this new bill came out that was pro that, and they made a really good profit off that. But all this insider information that's happening, and it all stems down from these central banks all the way to whichever politicians controlling the fiscal policy. They all work in the same system, and they're pumping money into the property markets. They're pumping money into whatever they see fit. Even Wells Fargo about an hour ago is closing all personal credit lines. That's one of the biggest banks in America, and that means they're going to be passing a lot of people onto specific products that the government wants into order to KYC and look at how you manage your money, and that's all moving to central bank digital currencies, etc. But anyway, I digress. But all of this just shows it's not a free market we're living anymore. It's not.
No, sure. No, it's completely controlled and fixed, and I mean we could call it, I don't know, marketism, I suppose. I'm not too sure what neoliberal economics, Keynesian economics. I agree with all of that, but the undoing of all that doesn't equal more free markets. Like, we have to physically undo, we have to physically clamp down on the powers of all of these politicians and banks and tech companies first,
so Bitcoin
or divvy them up somehow.
Yeah.
Like, Bitcoin undermines them. Bitcoin goes straight to the root of the problem.
It does. It goes to the root of the problem. It goes to the money supply, right? And that is the root of the problem. But there will always be intermediaries after that. There will be central players saying, okay, well, we've got this, liquidity, and we're going to disperse it in a certain fashion. You have to, in a perfect world, everybody has some equal access to the supply, which is not going to happen.
No, but equal access is commie talk, bro. There's in a Bitcoin standard, or in a world of hyper Bitcoinization where everyone's using Bitcoin, if you're a bad actor or a government, for example, and you want to pay off Google, you want to not quite pay them off, but give them some massive stimulus program, which they're beneficiaries of the Cantillon effect all the time, right? So Google, actually Tesla is a great example, because Tesla gets subsidies from the government for their bullshit cars that set themselves on fire. So they get subsidies from the government. If we were on a Bitcoin standard, the government only has X amount of Bitcoin to hand out because of the Bitcoin they've levied through taxes, right? Once that Bitcoin is gone, it's gone. You can't get it back, and you can't print them. You can't run the money printer to get that money again, which is currently how the system works. They run the money printer, they hand it out to their cronies, and when they finish handing out the cronies, they just hand out more because they just print it, and that steals from everyone else to get their cronies the wealth. And under a Bitcoin standard, you can't do that. Wealth only accretes to those who actually add value in the market. And to get back to the question of morality in the market, within, it's a strange phenomenon to see within the Bitcoin community, but there's a very, very strong like moral framework within Bitcoin maximalists as to like what is right and what is wrong and what we think ethically, like how people should behave. But that'll dilute as the market cap grows and more diverse views come into it. But that the core maximalist kind of view is quite a strongly ethical one. But Bitcoin literally undermines the ability of central banks to pick winners and losers. So the Cantillon effect effectively goes away, because people who position themselves close to politics position themselves close to the money printer, and that's how they benefit of government. They benefit from government largesse. And Elon Musk is trying to do this again now in China. You see himself simping to China. He's there saying, "Oh, you guys have achieved so much, and it's amazing to see what you've done." Obviously, he's just trying to get the Chinese government to point the money printer in his direction, so you can get some subsidized cars in China too. But that's how it goes. But under a Bitcoin standard, they couldn't do that because governments can print money, and they wouldn't be able to corrupt society the way they have been able to do it currently. So maybe it doesn't get us all the way there to fixing the market, but I think it definitely gets us moving in the right direction and actually getting free markets and essentially decentralizing the market. Because what we have now is a massively centrally controlled, not even market, something else. I don't know, the creature from Jekyll Island. Like it's a fascist state really, where the government dictates who's going to win and lose, and they even dictate who's going to be able to say what who can say what and who can't say what, and who gets cut off from financial services. I mean, that's essentially fascist wet dream.
And the most nefarious aspect, especially in the last year, is that the government says vaccines are mandatory. You can have one if you want one, but then all the airlines say, well, if you want to travel ever again, you need a vaccine. If you want, that's just the start. I'm sure by the time you need to open a bank account in 2 years, they're going to ask for your vaccine pass. So the government offloads that responsibility to the corporate sector, because the government can't do it because it's discriminatory under their own constitutions or rules. But the corporate sector can discriminate as much as they want. And unfortunately, libertarians would absolutely defend that without understanding that the corporate sector is doing what the government wants them to do, in essence. And that's where I talk about the sort of the morality of the market. I know it's not a free market at all, but the corporate sector is the one actually implementing the policies that the governments can't due to their own, separation of state and all that sort of stuff. And that's the most nefarious aspect of this whole money system.
I think that was the penny that dropped for me on libertarianism, where I was like, okay, no, I don't quite subscribe to this anymore. It was where they were defending corporates who were like Discovery, for example, who wants to roll out the NHI in South Africa. And you look at that and you're like, clearly there's collusion between big government and big business. It's like a revolving door. Obviously, we know about this. Like, so I'm all for business to be able to choose what they want to do, but I'm not naive enough to assume that big business and big government don't collude together. So because once again, it's a Cantillon effect. You just want to get close to the money printer. The Discovery Holdings just wants to be close to the money printer so they can be the beneficiary thereof when they roll out NHI, and they don't care if it destroys the country because they got paid, and their money's offshore in Mauritius. So YOLO.
It is. I actually did a story about Discovery, big shareholders like the CEO and the CFO selling like hundreds of millions of rands worth of shares over the past 2 years. It's like, oh wow, guys, I wonder what's happening. Such great faith in the company that you built, huh? Selling 600 to 800 million rand worth of shares over 2 years. I'm sure everything's great.
Sure, they have loads of faith in their company, right?
Yeah, that's right. And in the country, definitely.
Yeah. But so on, this is a great...
Yes.
No, sorry, carry on.
No. It was a flippant comment, nothing substantial.
It's look, podcasts are built on flippant comments. It was a good segue into the next piece, which is like South Africa and the future of South Africa, and really the topic for the show, which is anarchism, or South Africa as a blueprint for anarchism, right? So where do you think South Africa in 10 years? Let's paint a picture. What do you think is going to be the landscape?
South Africa in 10 years. I mean, I'm not a prophet. I can just tell you about the different scenarios. I think, for the most part, I think we're not going to be anywhere better than what we are now. I think the opportunities to build alternatives will be greater than ever. I think civil society will be stronger than the state at that time. And importantly, Frans Cronje's overview of the four scenarios, where it could be sort of right-wing authoritarianism, which I can't see, rainbow nationalism, which I don't see at all, Venezuela, which they're pushing for, and the fourth one is the Enclave System. I'm in the fourth quadrant. I think the Enclave System is the one that will win out de facto, not de jure, not because people will it, just because there will be nothing else holding back the Enclave System. The key thing, though, is it's all well and good to think there will be an Enclave System, but guys, you need to build those systems. Like, you need to build your enclave right now. You should have started 10 years ago, but you should build them. They don't just miraculously occur out of nowhere.
Sorry, Roman, can you elaborate on the Enclave System for our viewers, what that is?
So Enclave System is basically, according to Franz Cronier's book, which was a guide to 2030, which he wrote in 2013 or 2014. I think that's or 2016 even. 2016. Basically, the Enclave System is, in essence, parts of South Africa will be fairly semi-autonomous because the power of the central state is going to be diminished through corruption and hollowing out of state institutions. They're out of money, as we well know. They might print more, we might get high inflation, but as Franz says, and as a lot of other people say, the possibility to build alternatives to state governance, it's massive opportunity to build alternatives. That's what the Solidarity Movement is doing. That's what the Cape Independence movement is doing. Once you add in cryptocurrency, once you add in 3D printing, once you add in the fact that you can feed a family, these days technology is you can have a greenhouse of 10 square meters and have enough vegetables to feed a family for a month. I mean, the ability to homestead in the real sense and scale that to a community sense is higher than ever. And I think that's what the Enclave System would actually become. So not all of South Africa. I think there'll be lawless patches between enclaves that actually do give a shit and do actually take on the role of becoming a real enclave based on safety, based on the ability to defend itself, based on the ability to trade with other enclaves. But in between all the enclaves, there might be, a real lawless Mad Max wasteland where sort of gangs will be the governance structure. Like now.
So way to talk about the Karoo, Roman.
Just came back from the Karoo, best place in the world. I'll build my enclave over there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you need to have micro nuclear first so you can get some power there. But have
you seen the sun there? It shines all day, every day. One solar panel can run a whole town there, no stress. In 10 years' time, at least. Not now. Yeah. Look, I mean, the enclave model is an attractive one, and it seems like it'll be for me the logical way it kind of pans out. Just because look at towns around South Africa where it's already happening. Look at Queenstown. Look at like not King Williamstown so much, but Harrismith, where the local community is literally not unseating the government through a violent coup, but the government has imploded on itself just to sheer incompetence, and the people just take over. They're just ignoring the government.
Yeah,
like completely ignoring them. But they're doing everything the government needs to do by completely ignoring and cutting out the government entirely, which is perfect. The government is powerless to do anything.
Yep. The key difference comes in, though, and as we've seen it in Nkandla over this last week, which is key to this entire thing, is that you need to have the ability to defend yourself. Otherwise, the police will roll in like they rolled into the beaches in Clifton and arresting people on the beach. But if you have a couple of overweight dudes with guns, they think twice. Like look at Nkandla. It wasn't a big force defending it. If the government really wanted to, they should have been able to roll in there quite quickly and fire a few shots, and they would have had Jacob Zuma. But either there's a political thing going on, and they didn't want to be seen to be fighting within the ANC publicly, and that's why they didn't go that route, or they didn't want to show how useless they are when they actually do get into a real altercation, and when people start shooting back.
Well, I think Bekitele was actually quite true, and I think he spoke from his heart when he said we didn't actually roll in because there were people with guns, and the role of the police is to preserve human life. I mean, it's the first time the police cares about human life at all. But I think there would have been, if Marikana times 100, if people started shooting, there were, as far as I know, a few hundred people protecting the Nkandla homestead, and Bekitele said there were 100 of them carrying guns. That is a lot of guns, guys. Even if they hold 10 rounds each, I mean, that's 1,000 rounds of ammo. That's a lot of ammo. If it wasn't in Canada, I think the police would have just bulldozed through and not given a shit and shot everyone in sight. Don't get me wrong. But I think the essential element, if you want to build your enclave, is that every able-bodied human being should be a gun owner. And defending yourself with guns, 3D printing guns, having a shooting range, and practicing should be an essential element of being a member of an enclave in South Africa. Outsourcing it to security companies, it's all nonsense. It needs to come from within, from the people actually living there. There's much more to lose. It's the Battle of Thermopylae, Sparta versus Xerxes, right? Spartans weren't just defending their kingdom. They were defending the very land they owned, right? Whereas Xerxes, in the Battle of 300, the movie, Xerxes just had slaves as soldiers. Spartans had slaves, but the soldiers were distinct land-owning class of Sparta. And you'll always fight better when you have skin in the game rather than attempting to outsourcing it to a security company or something like that. Also, that money problem comes in where it's so cheap to delegate stuff to other people, right? We all do it. We got security guards, or we have domestic workers, or whatever the case might be. But sometimes it might be a good idea to introspect a little bit and think to yourself, skin in the game is vitally important. I can clean my own house. I can defend my own house. I can buy food from local sources. That's how you build resilience, not by delegating and outsourcing. It makes sense in the division of labor and economically, but culturally or communitarily, if that's even a word, it makes less sense. You need to have skin in the game throughout that entire process.
Yeah. And so the kind of enclave model where each enclave will have to develop their own militia, like you say, and 3D printing of firearms is vital to this entire thing. But then again, getting hold of firearms is definitely not a very difficult thing to do, and there's no shortage of willing sellers. But being able to make them your components yourself on hand is vital. And then being able to trade with the rest of the world, and especially if you're living in a knowledge-based economy where you can trade things digitally, and if you can earn in a global currency like Bitcoin, for example, in these enclaves, you can, because the wasteland around you is still going to be fiat currency based. The government's still going to be printing money. So over the long term, as they keep doing that, the enclave will grow in fun if they're using Bitcoin and people inside are earning in Bitcoin working with the global economy. The purchasing power of those citizens will grow so much, and they'll be so wealthy relative to the rest of the area around them. Okay, A, it puts a target on their back for people to come and attack, but B, makes them way more wealthy than the government around them, which means you can buy more weapons to defend yourself.
But the most important thing to me, once again with enclaves, it's like a distributed network of little nodes, right? That's the way I see it. You don't have one nation state; you have a bunch of places running by themselves,
like
but
city states,
But what would cause them
cantons.
to go to war? Yeah, what would cause them to go to war with each other is one getting more power, and then placing that power over another, etc. And we've watched that over millennia. But with Bitcoin, no one controls it, right? And that's the key. That's the key. Like, nobody will control it. Nobody can manipulate it. And therefore, everybody is on a similar system.
So have you two read The Sovereign Individual?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Finally. Cultured people. It's very difficult to find people who've read that book. I think the book is one of the most fascinating. Oh, really? Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. I just happened to. Naval Ravikant mentioned it once on a podcast somewhere. He says this is like one of the best books I've ever read. So I was like, cool, and I read it. The theory there is returns on violence theory, right? Where political power or authoritative power is based on the returns on violence. If you have the same currency and you are extremely wealthy compared to those around you, the returns on violence in terms of trying to be an imperialist and take over another enclave, it just makes much more sense to trade with them. If you have the same parity in terms of wealth and the same currency, right? And Bitcoin, I think, will work very well in that regard. Why be a pillager, rapist, and plunderer when you can just trade with the same currency? That makes far more sense. And hopefully that is what will actually happen.
Yeah. And the other key component is that you can't confiscate Bitcoin. So even if you invade and take over that area geographically, to get the Bitcoin out of the individuals living there is near impossible, because you have to physically torture all of them. And remember, they are richer than you. So to get them, they're going to be shooting back with bigger guns and more expensive guns, which changes the dynamics of violence, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's going to be a very interesting case. But I think South Africa is primed for Bitcoin, because there is technological infrastructure, like there's communication networks, there's transport networks, etc. There's significant political unrest, and there's a failing state under its own, you know, by itself. No one else has to help it fail. It's just failing by itself. So I think I think the Enclave scenario is the most realistic, like you say. Just by default, it's kind of going to go that way. But people are going to have to build, and they're going to have to realize what they need to build, and have a clear strategy, which I think Solidarity and Afriforum, etc., do have. But the missing component here is, if you build all of this based on the rand, you're setting yourself up for failure. Even if you just base it on the dollar, you're setting yourself up for failure, because you're still going to be debased. Look at El Salvador. They're a dollarized country. They were experiencing the inflation before the Americans were, because the dollars that are printed in America show up around the world first, especially if America's handing out stimulus to their local citizens. They're all getting stimmy checks in the mail that they've just printed up. And that inflation is experienced around the world first, particularly in countries that are not getting stimulus checks, that use their dollar as their own currency. So if you're an enclave that sets us up on the dollar because you want to get away from the rand and the rand volatility, you're just going to get screwed further on the line when the dollar collapses, because that's inevitable as well. It's a fiat currency. So Bitcoin needs to become like a...
I think so. And I find it strange that coins haven't been created for South African use. I know you guys are against like alternative coins or shit coins or whatever you call them. But surely there could be something. Well, I suspect you'll say, Bitcoin's already there. Why build anything else? Is that your argument? I would suspect.
Yeah, there is a South African stable coin, a South African rand stable coin, if you want to use that. And there's 10,000 other.
What's the point of that?
Does that solve your problem?
What's the point of having a coin pegged to the rand? That's ridiculous. Yeah. Just use a rand.
And then there's tethers, like the synthetic dollar, and the synthetic dollars are very useful. There's $60 billion.
It will be.
Yeah, there's $60 billion in liquidity in stable coins now globally. It's a very big use case right now in the world, because you see a lot of South Africans use it for arbitrage. They're like buying Bitcoin offshore. They change it to Tether. They bring it over here. They convert it. They sell, or vice versa, because a lot of people are doing that. So 2 weeks ago or last week, it was actually cheaper to buy Bitcoin here than America. So there's all that game plan. That's why you're seeing a lot of regulation coming out now that it's very nasty towards Bitcoin. Like, they don't like this money going offshore.
But
go ahead, Ricky.
No, sorry, finish your point. Mine's a separate one.
No, I've noticed that banks are cracking down heavily on, you can't buy your Bitcoin on Binance or exchanges outside the country. Before, you could do whatever the hell you want. Now, apparently, it's a big problem. Once again, corporate South Africa implementing bullshit policies from the state drives me crazy.
Spineless tax.
Yeah. No, not spineless. Beta male cucks. Like they film their wives being shagged by someone else. They like it.
Yeah, they make money out of it.
Yeah.
But to the point of why not use alternative currencies? So money is a network, right? And the bigger your network, the more useful it is. So if you have a network that has got a small network effect, like let's say a alt currency, like let's call it the Ura, for example, they have in Oranje, right? They've got a digital token there called the Ura. They've had it for a couple of years. The network effect is tiny. There's only a small amount of users that you can interact with by using the Ura, right? Are you guys still with me? It seems to be freezing up here.
I can still see you.
Okay, cool.
Brandon's frozen.
So you've got a small network in the Ura, as it were, So I can't, as someone in Oranje, I can't transact using the Ura to someone in Venezuela and someone in Spain and someone in Iceland. I have to go through multiple intermediaries to get there. Whereas if I just use Bitcoin, the network effect is global, and I can transact with anyone on Earth who also uses Bitcoin without having to go through an intermediary. So with money, it's a winner-takes-all thing. Like, you want to go with the money that's got the biggest network effect. And that's why we see the US dollar having the biggest network effect of fiat currencies, and countries all around the world pegging themselves to the dollar because of that network effect and not going for a smaller currency. So in terms of altcoins being money, the game has already been won by Bitcoin. In terms of altcoins trying to do something else, but that is not money, potentially interesting. But once again, you can build those things on top of Bitcoin in the future where you leverage the security of Bitcoin, and then everything is more secure. So once again, that kills those altcoins too. So all in all, I don't really see much of a utility for altcoins going forward. I might be wrong, but just looking at it that way, I don't think so.
Is there a big anarchist streak in Bitcoin generally, in the Bitcoin community?
Bitcoiners are pretty much all anarchists, yeah.
All right, fair enough. And I suppose they are sort of right-wing capitalist anarchists, right? No, I think, yeah, everyone's internet crashed. Well, except for mine. Mine was stable. But, yeah, both of you just, like, dropped me.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know where we dropped off, but within the Bitcoin community, Bitcoiners are mainly anarchist and on the right, for sure.
All right, no, fair enough. And I think, I mean, the Enclave system is a perfect test case for this sort of stuff.
Exactly.
So I know in Bitcoin terms, like, oh, El Salvador's a big deal. Some people think it isn't, like Nassim Taleb, but he's got a problem with Bitcoin, generally speaking.
Yeah, he does. Because Seyfedin was rude to him.
Because who?
Because Seyfedin Ammous, the guy who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, who's also Lebanese, was rude to Nassim, and he was fragile about it.
All right. He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile. He should follow his own principles in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think Bitcoin in South Africa in an enclave system is a perfect test case. Not to make it official currency, but just because it's the best thing that is out there as a currency, right? We're not going to barter in 2041. Yeah. I'm not going to grow some wheat and exchange it for a chicken. We're not going to go back to the Middle Ages. We have to use modern means, and if the modern means is Bitcoin, then perfect test case. Like, bloody well use it.
Yeah, and I mean, if the free private city of Cape Town wishes to interact with the free private city of George and the free private city of Bloemfontein, you're not going to use the South African rand when the South African state is totally anti your existence. Like, you're going to use something else. And then why settle for? There's a global money that works, that's permissionless, that's decentralized. Like, it's by people will just naturally use Bitcoin. It's kind of I wouldn't say a foregone conclusion, but currently it's the strongest competitor to central banking. There's nothing else.
But there's one issue, and not, it's not an issue about Bitcoin itself or what it does, but the issue is that, I mean, the states will prop up their currencies to the nth degree. I mean, how on earth are people going to actually adopt something if they're not aware, or it takes a very long time to be aware that the currency they've been using their whole life is just fake and false? That's the biggest problem I see. Like, in South Africa, it will make sense because the rand will just be like 1,000 rand to $1. Like, it will be the shift will be so huge, people will automatically go into other assets. But for the rest of the world, I don't know.
So Austrian economists have been banging on about fiat currency and inflationary money for decades. And how many people took notice? Hardly anyone. It was academic, right? Now compare that to how long has Bitcoin been around for? 12 years. And every single person on earth pretty much has heard of Bitcoin by now. And most people who get into Bitcoin realize very early on what fiat is. Most people didn't know what fiat currency was before Bitcoin. Now a lot of people do. So I think Bitcoin is something that teaches people financial education. It makes people realize what shit money is and what good money is. Whereas academics have been trying to teach people this for decades and gotten nowhere. And Bitcoin's a decentralized protocol without any leaders or any academics or government or anything behind it. It has succeeded in not red pilling, but orange pilling tens of hundreds of millions of people around the world. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, for now, only the terrorists and the thieves and the drug dealers use it. So we can't use it anymore because Pablo Escobar had to buy all those elastic bands to roll around his hardware wallet, right?
Yeah. We should have banned plastic. We should have banned rubber bands to stop Pablo Escobar from tying all his money up with it, right? That would have stopped the problem.
Yeah. Yes, people are idiots.
But
all in, it makes sense.
No, it's ridiculous.
Sorry, but I mean, you're interviewing me, so please ask questions. Sorry, I tend to Be the
Slip
other way
back
around
into
for some
it.
reason. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a question about when someone becomes a thorn in the side of government, when a civic organization or a group of people become a thorn in the side of government. Do you think financial repression is a tool that's going to be wielded against them? So like cutting them off from the banking system, for example.
Absolutely. Alex Jones is like the martyr. I actually listened to a podcast that he was on today with Michael Malice, of all people. And they just went through where he was banned. Like Uber banned him for some reason. Uber. He didn't trash an Uber car, as far as I know. He's banned off Uber, banned off Google, banned off YouTube. His banks banned him. So now he has an overseas offshore server payment system where he pays triple the price to receive donations in an offshore account that is then sent back to America. Like the guy is treated like a Jew in Nazi Germany, right?
Yeah.
When between 33 and 38, you could be Jewish and live in Nazi Germany, but it's going to be very expensive, and basically the whole society will not allow you to use their services. And I think Alex Jones is really at the forefront of what a lot of other institutions and people will come up, be faced with in time to come. In South Africa, the government's not that, great about enforcing anything because they're useless. But I'm sure FNB is, or ABSA, or Investec, and I'm sure that if the government leverages enough pressure on those institutions, they will certainly cut off AfriForum or my bank account or your bank account or whoever they want to enforce that against. So that's definitely something in the pipeline and something people need to be aware of.
And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. No. Because if you become enough of a thorn in the side, and first they came for Julian Assange and I didn't speak out, and then they came for Edward Snowden and I didn't speak out, and then they came for Alex Jones and I didn't speak out, and then they came.
I cheered. Yeah. People cheered when Alex Jones was banned from everywhere.
People cheered. And then they come for you and there's no one left to speak out, right? But Bitcoin fixes this because no one can stop you.
No, I suppose not. Aren't you guys, sorry, I'm back to the interviews part. Aren't you guys maybe a little bit terribly romantic about Bitcoin? Are you sure there's no way some government official somewhere can think of a plan to just cut off the balls of Bitcoin in a material sense? Not a government official, but is it not
some private? I don't like this private guy, maybe.
No, I don't like this notion of just progress, right? It was created and it'll just be used.
Yeah,
I don't know about that. I really don't know. I like it. I like the tech.
History, though, right?
There's two
Bitcoin's
things.
History is one of.
Yeah, sorry, Ricky.
Sorry, Brandon. Finish this.
Yeah.
Bitcoin's history is one of struggle and permanent attack. It's not just invented and it was clear sailing, and so it's been under attack since day one. Sorry, Brandon. Carry on there.
Yeah, so there's two things to separate Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin's network, and what happened very recently is China basically banned it, and there was around 40 to 50% of Bitcoin's hash power, which is its network power, has been removed, and it's migrating across the world right now. So imagine if you went to a bank's network or Visa network and you took off 50%, it would implode. It would literally implode. But that just carried on, validating blocks, the network carried on without not the little few hitches here and there. It just means the law was a little bit delayed, but transactions still happened in the most secure manner in the world. But then there's Bitcoin's value proposition, and its $30,000 outlook and its market cap. And those are the things that the government can attack. That's what the government will keep trying to attack, is its value. But its network, they can't take down. It is physically impossible. And that's why we're such big proponents about shitcoins, because you got things like Ethereum, where they're moving from proof of work, which is what Bitcoin works on, and they're moving to something called proof of stake. And they've been trying to do it for many years. They said it would take 1 year. Now they're saying it's going to take 6 years. And it's basically they're moving from a system where they say they're going to use, less than only about 1% of Bitcoin's energy to now validate transactions, but it's going to be very centralized. Only a select few can determine what can happen, and that's the same shit show you're seeing happen in traditional systems. So their networks are prime for governments to go after. The governments will go after, or they will co-op. You'll see central bank digital currencies go, oh, Ethereum, let's partner and let's use these other systems because we're basically the one and the same. That, that thesis really actually might play out. It's starting to become a more and more of reality, and there's probably Ethereum people going crazy right now if they would hear that, but it really could happen. And if they don't work together, they're central figures, they're central points, and they will take it down. But with Bitcoin, they can't.
But if you have your own enclave system in South Africa and you want to develop a coin just for that enclave, just for internal trade, not for external trade, it might be quite beneficial to have a board to make sure that it remains sound and low time preferences will exist in perpetuity. I know that is against the notion. I know you'll say, dude, just use Bitcoin because that's what it does anyway, right?
Yeah, so they could do that. They could do that, but then we're talking going back to the point, like then there'll be unequal societies, and now the sovereign individual comes into
central
play.
Banking again.
Yeah, I know, but also you can't. Why not have your own little coin that is, a lot of transactions happening, but it's settled on Bitcoin, like it would if you would settle on the first layer with gold or something. That could work as long as you have finality and ability to mutually agree on something, whether it's internally or externally with everybody, then it can work. But as soon as you have your little shitcoin enclosed system that only you agree with, you can't go and trade with other people because they're not going to agree with you. Like, what the hell's that?
I mean, you just end up with central banking again.
Okay, fine. I'm schooled. I get it. Jeez. Anything else? You invite me on the show and you just shit on me from on high.
for your shitcoinery.
Fair enough. I don't want to ask more questions. Please slide in towards me.
But imagine you have the noblest of intentions to start up your own internal currency in your new enclave, and you're like, we have this board of governors. They all have our enclave's best interests at heart, and they do. For that first generation, while all of them are on the board, and they slowly start dying off, and then new people come in, and then lobbyists start sidling up to those guys because they're like, hey, we want to start a new arms industry out of our enclave. We've been really good at shooting the government when they come around. Now we're building our own weapons. Why don't you guys print some money and pay for this contract, and then we can sell arms to other enclaves? The next minute you've got central banking all over again. Like the real distinction comes between, should humans be controlling the monetary system, and if humans are controlling the monetary system, what are the externalities of that? You're going to create the Gini coefficient. You're going to create inequality, which is natural, but you're going to create inequality with chosen predefined winners and losers. Whereas if you've got a monetary system that is governed by the laws of nature and physics and math, like gold, for example, it's way, way harder to gamify that system. So this is why Bitcoin is an alternative to central banking, not just because it's the only one that currently exists, but it's because of the philosophy of like, this rules should be set in stone and not changed by anyone, run by anyone, no matter how powerful they are. That's the difference there, really.
No, fair enough. No, I think that's fair.
Rules without rules.
I think I think it's integral to the type of enclave system I would want. One where I don't know. I'm still torn between economics creates the culture, or does the culture determine the economics?
It's a very good question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I still don't know the answer. Neither does Davy Ritt. He was on our show the other day and he said the same thing. I mean,
really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's clearly a difficult question.
No, it is, because if you want traditional modes of governance or things like that, you'll need low time preferences, you'll need real value, you'll need sound money, and that will create the need to build beautiful things, or to build things that will last, or to pollute less, or things like that. But I don't know which ones comes first, the culture or the currency.
Yeah, it's kind of like, because in history we've seen that culture has eventually led to a shit money that eventually led to a collapse, like Rome, right? They melted down their coins to have, 70% of copper, and eventually soldiers weren't willing to accept that, and then they rebelled, etc., and that's what collapsed. Although that's a thesis. I don't know. I mean, I've done short readings on it. I don't know if it's true or not, right? But also what we're seeing now is shit money system is leading to a really crap kind of culture. You're seeing retards go on Robinhood and buy meme stocks, and you're just seeing money not treated like this with respect. So in the past, those kind of steps happened and then eventually led to a collapse and a reset. So I don't know if it's just always synchronous and one leads to the same, or it can happen the other way. I haven't seen the other side.
Because a good example of this is the highway system in America. It's a federalized system. The federal state gave a lot of money to states to build freeways for easier transport, and this was in the 60s, I think. So just before the quarter gold standard was taken away by Nixon in 71 or 72, I can't remember. Yeah. And I read a great essay by a very conservative guy, a very religiously conservative guy, talking about car culture in America, where the car is sort of the property I own. It's my domain, and I can go wherever I want. And so therefore, the building of the infrastructure created the car culture, and the car culture destroys cities and destroys towns because you need, roads. You can't have a human scale town where people walk around and visit the corner shop and walk to school and walk this and walk. Yeah. You need roads to accommodate all these bloody cars. So the freeway system destroyed small towns across America, because now any small town had to accommodate these cars, which is one of the most inefficient ways to transport people. Trams are far better. Trains are much better than any of these things. But it was created by, money from the central state and given as bribes to the states in general to build these freeways that you can crisscross America in 10 hours. Great. But what have you lost? The cost of goods are cheaper and more efficient, but what have you lost in terms of a cultural aspect in your town? And that's what that's why I'm so focused on the cultural costs. The economic costs, I think, are easy to understand, but the cultural social capital is a much more nuanced question that people don't really think about.
And there's a famous Bitcoin writer who actually died last year, but he wrote quite extensively on this, about the freeway system in the US and how the cost of maintaining the freeways is enormous. And this is why the infrastructure is slowly degrading and collapsing around the US, because they had this massive boom with the Great Societies and with the FDRs, like massive expansion of government, where they built out all this infrastructure, and that the cost to maintain that network of infrastructure is just prohibitive, and it doesn't last. And the more money you print, that doesn't mean the cost of maintaining that goes away. It just means inflation goes up and you pay more to maintain that, but eventually it still falls apart, because $10 50 years ago is now $1 million in 20 years time. It's relative to inflation. So you can't maintain these things. So you've lost your culture because you've destroyed your small towns and your small cities that are walkable and usable, and you've destroyed them culturally, and then you destroy them economically over time as well.
And all you're left with is McDonald's. All you're left with is McDonald's, Walmart, and Amazon drone deliveries. But Walmart is not going to sponsor your local rugby club, right? You're not going to have a local bowling club where people will congregate and play bowls. No, they will go to the McDonald's restaurant and just sit there and eat McDonald's. Like it's the worst thing about the money system as we have now is just the uniform mediocrity across the world. I've traveled, like not all countries. I've traveled to a lot of countries, and as soon as I find a McDonald's, I'm just like disgusted. Like I spend a lot of money to come for a cultural experience, and there's fucking Mackie D's here.
Yeah,
it's just a terrible thing.
Yeah.
I'm never going to Machu Picchu in Peru. That's the biggest tourist. That's the biggest tourist destination in South America, right? There's a fucking McDonald's on the trail.
No,
what?
No. You should have firebombed it. You should have set fire to it. They should be selling tortillas and guacamole or whatever the fuck they eat over there. But I mean, to have McDonald's at Like, I'm sure one day
Well,
you're going to trek up the Great Pyramids of Giza, and at the top, you will have a McDonald's burger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so the lefties always harp on about consumer culture and how America's so consumerist, and they blame that on capitalism. But it's consumerism is not blamed on capitalism. Capitalism is about the preservation of capital. Consumerism is driven by cheap money and by the actual destruction of capital, because governments can print money ad infinitum. And that, like I said right in the beginning, it filters down to everything, down to the quality of our food. So there's a guy we've got lined up to come on the pod in a few weeks' time. We've got to nail down a date still, but he's all about regenerative agriculture in the US and raising cattle specifically. So cattle that you put onto your land, the cattle shit on the land, and that brings fertility back into the soil if you rotate the cattle around. But you then, if you're going to be using cattle like that, you need to bring your costs down, because what you want to do is improve your land as a secondary effect. The first thing you're trying to achieve is meat production, right? But now you want to use cattle that are resilient, that don't need to be injected with antibiotics and can give birth without having a human and a vet there to make sure they give birth properly. So you've got to find the most resilient cattle, like our Nguni cattle, for example. They can survive tsetse fly and all of that. They don't die at the sight of a fly. But if you do that, and you take those like kind of landrace species, it pushes out the time to when you can harvest by about 6 months. So instead of having a 18-month or 12-month cycle before you can slaughter the animal, let's say it was 12 months, now it's 18 months. There's an additional 6 months that goes in that you have to wait before you can slaughter the animal. But that high time preference of wanting the head of cattle in 12 months distorts all economic calculations now, and changes the quality of the meat, because you've got to pump that thing full of hormones. You've got to pump it full of antibiotics. It destroys the land it's on, because you've got to put it in a feedlot. So like it's just ruining everything the whole way down the chain, as opposed to going for the regenerative route, waiting 6 months longer, have a lower time preference. Your meat is better. There's no antibiotics in it. Your soil is better because you're constantly improving your soil. And that's the one resource we can never rebuild in our lifetimes, is soil. So we need to treat it with the utmost respect, which we don't, because we have high time preference. And so it filters that free, cheap money destroys everything down the line, just like it destroys our society by handing out stimmy checks and welfare. It destroys culture and society. It destroys the environment and everything, and it filters down to the food quality. That's how you get McDonald's, is by living on it's Fiat food from a Fiat standard, and that's no wonder we got Fiat people now.
No, that's actually a very great point. But I know we're supposed to talk about anarchism, but I hope people that watch this will see how embedded the monetary system and the type of money we use impacts on your everyday life. I like this notion that we are more connected than ever, but we are more lonely and depressed and anxious than ever. Like that is basically because of cheap money. Where at the flick of a switch or a tap on your phone, you can get the latest McDonald's straight to your door. You don't need to see other people. You don't need to create anything in the kitchen. You don't have to worry about where your food's coming from. And that's a terrible way to live. It really, really is. I remember going on a trip to Switzerland when I was young. Very nice hotel, ski resort. And on the menu, it was a set menu every night. You had to wear a tie. On the menu, it says the beef is from this place. Right? Like the beef is from Aix-en-Provence or whatever the canton's called. And I said, why do you care where the hell your beef comes from? Beef is beef, right? And the Swiss maitre d' was like, listen, you little shit. Not in those terms, but he says, in Switzerland, we care deeply about what we eat, what we consume, where it comes from, and it must be Swiss, or it must be within roughly 100 kilometers from where we consume it, right? We don't want beef in your beef mince. I don't know if you check your beef mince, like there's beef in there from sometimes 3-4 countries. Like how can you think that is proper meat if there's if a third of a cow in Brazil and a fifth of a cow in Israel and half a cow in South Africa come together in your beef patty? That's no way to live. There's so much wrong with that notion. And that's essentially why I'm hunting. So I just wanted to punt hunting, because hunting's great, because you know exactly where your meat is coming from, because you actually see it out in the wild. But I think the way economics impacts on culture is fascinating, and conservatives keep losing because they keep going for the free market stuff in a rigged system, and that free market stuff destroys the culture they're trying to preserve. And that's why the dissident right is coming out and saying, listen, free market, whatever, what we need to do is preserve what we can, and we'll need to build walls around money and make sure that the economy is a tool that we can wield. The economy works for us. We don't work for the economy. And I think that's a good distinction to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry,
and I think
that was the right.
No, I think it's a
no,
great
that was
way
beautiful.
to put things.
Yeah, I mean the hunting part, especially, like, lefties look at hunting and they're like, oh, it's terrible, you're killing an animal. That animal has lived free its entire life. Unless you quest balk it dies pretty quickly, and you get to eat meat that has got 0 hormones in it. You know exactly where it's come from. It's grass fed, and if you shoot a big animal like an eland, that's enough meat for a year for your entire family. It's
Certainly is
great.
Certainly is, and a lot of and you don't get to choose which animal you shoot. You shoot generally the eldest male, because the eldest male, especially in antelope, they lose their teeth. They got no natural predators. They lose their teeth and they die of starvation. Do you want that to happen in your natural environment? No. Or do you want it to be torn apart when it's very old by a pack of jackals or a pack of caracal or whatever the case might be? While it's alive, it gets eaten. No, a bullet straight to the heart, to the head, is far more, ethical. And then it lives on in its ability to feed human beings that you love. I mean,
and
what is more ethical than that?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, deeply respected.
Yeah, because you've gone out and carried that thing on your back out of where well, it depends if you're hunting off the back of a bucky or not. Depends how much of a player you are.
That's not hunting. That's culling. That's something we don't do. That's very low. That's very hard time preference hunting, which is something I don't condone.
Good man. But yeah, if you go and carry your animal out that you've shot, like, you're respecting that. You're not wasting any meat because you carried this thing on your back. Like the entire process is much more respectful and in tune with the earth than just getting your meat from a feedlot. And getting
last weekend I went hunting for a springbok, just for one. It took me 3 days to get one. I had 100 opportunities to shoot one, but not in a way that I was comfortable, that would minimize suffering. So it took me 3 days. I waited out there in the hot Karoo sun and got it.
Germ breakings is nothing to do with comfort, it's more to do with your aim.
Oh yeah, Jim talks a lot of shit. He says I was wearing white pants. They were actually beige. You can't trust someone who just lies like that,
Can't trust someone who wears white pants, in my experience.
Yeah, true story. Unless you're a steward on a ship or like a jazz singer. But other than that, no.
Or born again Christian.
Oh, did they wear white pants? I had no idea.
I mean, depends how happy clappy you are. Anyway, we're digressing hard now.
Yeah. Happy clappy Christians are high time preference Catholics. And it's degenerative.
Look, I'm from the Tell. I can bet that there's a lot of them there. God, they infest the place.
No, they do. And you go to church, like your Fiat church, which is like a hall, and then you got a band.
Yeah.
And people sing, and everyone's a fucking pastor. And then you got like 5 pastors in their half-ton bucky with plumbing equipment at the back coming in to say the Lord is great. Life is short. Do what you can. Like, fuck off.
No, I remember I was at boarding school. We used to be forced to go to chapel like 3 times a week. And there were the happy clappy chapel stuff. I used to sit with the Muslim kids because they were forced to go to chapel. And I used to sit with them because they didn't have to stand up. And I would just sit in the corner with them.
But that's Brandon. I know you went to degenerate school. I went to an Afrikaans school where they'd never tolerate that kind of behavior. There was no like you sitting somewhere and not doing something. You there, you in it, you partaking.
Yeah, no, I'm all for the Lindy effect of religion. Like we will know the name Jesus Christ in 5,000 years. We won't know the name of Sam Harris in like 20 years. So screw you, Sam Harris, if you are watching.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a Sam Harris fanboy.
Yeah. Just look at what has existed for so long. You can't just diminish that to like, oh, it's a superstition. It's whatever.
I mean, the low time preference of building building a cathedral that takes 200 years to complete. You know, like how can you write that off? And I'm not a religious person, but like how can you write off that kind of human effort and toil? You know?
Yeah, and yeah, I fully agree with you. Yeah, you have to be someone with absolutely no culture whatsoever to think that all this is for nothing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think on that bombshell, before we offend everyone, Roman, I'm pretty everyone knows where to find you, but where can they find your work for those who are unfamiliar?
The easiest thing is to Google Morning Shot. My SOE work has been phenomenal. Not really, but if you Google Morning Shot, I'm like the top 5 results on Google. So that is the best option. And I mean, I don't want to, I'm not a preacher. I'm not someone who tells people what to do, though. I think I should start doing that. But I think it's important for people to find pleasure in doing stuff slowly. I know it's sort of, there's no incentive to do that whatsoever. But I think it's very important to do stuff slowly. Like, for example, at our house, right? It's a short segue. Like, we make our own butter because we found out how to do it. We got a little vegetable garden and a few rabbits. We haven't eaten those yet, but if need be, we can. What else do we make? Like, we make our own pizza dough. Okay, our own bread, for example. And I'm not going to take credit. My wife does all of it. But there's a great pleasure for her in doing those things. And it's a great pleasure when we eat it together because we know exactly how it came about. And I think instead of using your money for convenience sake, like, just focus a little bit, spend a bit more money on valuable things, like valuable things that will last a long time, like making your own stuff or buying something that's made of leather or something made out of wood or brass. Like plastic, just do it with it, man. If everyone stopped using plastic or stop buying bananas that are wrapped in plastic, like it's so dumb.
Yeah.
Like, they got natural protective shell.
Wrappers.
Like, come now. Like, yeah. Like, go to a greengrocer, not to Woolworths, to buy your fruit. Like, I don't know, just like take things slowly, support local businesses, love your family, talk to your neighbors, set up a community watch group, and from there you just build on that. Like, it's very easy. You don't need to live like a hermit in the Karoo. You can do it right now, right? You can build your enclave right now just by learning who your neighbor is. It's very simple.
Well said.
Beautiful.
And
and
invest in Bitcoin. Oh, sorry, it's a Bitcoin show.
Yeah.
Invest in Bitcoin.
I was waiting for that.
There we go. Good. Right. Brandon, anything else from your side?
All good. Thank you.
Good. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Ramon, thanks again. That was fantastic. And we hope to see you soon. When you're down in the Cape, hit us up and we'll show you our enclave we've got going on down here. And we hope
very
to
good.
catch you soon.
It's a very clicky enclave, though.
Yeah, it is. You're not wrong. But high borders, high walls.
Yeah. Build them first, and then I'll be there to defend them. From the hordes of the whites left over in Gauteng, you want to come over too late. We'll shoot them down for you. Especially the Anglos. Can't be trusted.
There you go. Those are the last people to offend. Well done. We did it, guys.
The Anglos are not pissed off as well. Great. All right. On that bombshell. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, Ramon. Right. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.